economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
In today's top stories, the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, is in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, to take part in the 38th Summit of Heads of State and Government due to start on Saturday. Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf has pleaded from Addis Ababa for the unification of African efforts to rehabilitate the African Union and to strengthen its place on the international scene. The A3+ group of the Security Council has called on the international community to support the political transition in Syria. And the Algerian people are commemorating today the 65th anniversary of the first nuclear explosions carried out by the then French colonial authorities in southern Algeria. Hello and welcome on Radio Algeria International. I'm Jamal Slimani. The President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, is in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, in order to head the Algerian delegation taking part in the 38th Summit for Heads of State and Government of the African Union, scheduled to start on Saturday. The 46th Ordinary Session of the Executive Council of the African Union continued on Thursday, today, in Addis Ababa for the second day, ahead of the 38th Summit of Heads of State and Government scheduled to take place in the Ethiopian capital Saturday and Sunday. Yesterday, Mr. Ahmed Attaf pleaded from Addis Ababa for the unification of African efforts to rehabilitate the African Union and to strengthen its place on the international scene. In an opening address to the AU Executive Council on the occasion of the consideration of the report of the Permanent Representatives Committee, the Foreign Minister underlined that the critical and perilous situation in the international relations system is forcing African countries to speed up the establishment of mechanisms capable of preserving their common interests.
The delicate and critical situation that international relations are currently experiencing compels us, just as it does to others, to swiftly develop the best means to safeguard our shared interests. Today, more than ever, we need to close ranks, unite our efforts, and reinforce our commitment to the ambitions, aspirations, and objectives that binds us under the umbrella of this organization. At the same time, we are equally in need of rehabilitating our organization, improving its positioning, and restoring its role, authority, and stature after the marginalization and weakening it has endured.
In this respect, Ahmed Attaf called for seizing the opportunity of the African Summit due to start on Saturday to renew the institutional construction of the continental organization and strengthen its human component while enabling it to achieve its ambitious objectives, to consolidate the achievements made, to address the shortcomings identified, and to open up new perspectives for defending Africa's priorities in the face of external threats.
The institutional renewal of our organization, the strengthening of its human composition, and empowering it with the means to advance our shared ambitions and common aspirations. This is indeed an opportunity to consolidate the achievements made, rectify the recorded imbalances, and open new horizon to amplify our voice and advocate for our priorities in the face of looming external threats. We seek an organization with a strong presence and a tangible role in all crisis zones, conflicts, and wars that now dominate the security and political landscape of our continent. Moreover, we aspire to an organization that reintroduces the issue of continental economic development on a sound and proper foundation.
Mr. Ahmed Attaf has held talks in Addis Ababa with a number of his African counterparts on the sidelines of his participation in the proceedings of the Executive Council of the African Union. Ahmed Attaf met with the ministers of foreign affairs of Egypt, Mozambique, Ghana, and also from the countries of Cote d'Ivoire, Burundi, Lesotho, among others. Algeria is taking part in the 48th session of the Board of Governors of the International Agricultural Development Fund held Wednesday and Thursday in Rome, Italy. The Algerian delegation taking part in this session organized under the theme Catalyzing Investment at the First Kilometer is led by the Secretary General of the Ministry, Hamid Benzada, representing the Minister of the Sector, Youssef Sharfa. This session is an opportunity to exchange information and expertise to mobilize the necessary investments for turning rural areas into levers for economic growth, the rural world being considered by the organization the first step towards food safety. Now, the Minister of Interior Local Assemblies and Country Planning, Brahim Red, has taken part in the ministerial session of the 6th Arab Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in Kuwait, which ended with the adoption of a final declaration. The details with Said Bougazi.
The proceedings of this event, entitled Building Resilient Arab Communities from Understanding to Action, culminated in the adoption of a final declaration reaffirming the full awareness of the participating countries of the challenges posed by disaster risks in all their forms and their commitment to speeding up the implementation of the objectives and priorities of the Sendai Action Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-2030 and the Arab Strategy for 2030. The final declaration also stressed the importance of moving from disaster management to comprehensive disaster risk management through practices consistent with sustainable development policies, highlighting the imperative of developing an inclusive approach involving governments, civil society, academic circles, youth actors, as well as the most at-risk groups, the private sector and the media, with a view to reducing disaster risks in Arab communities. The sessions of this event enabled the Algerian delegation to shed light on the progress made in Algeria in terms of disaster risk management in implementation of the instructions of the President of the Republic, notably through a thorough revision of the legal framework following the promulgation of the 2004 law on the prevention of major risks and disaster management within the framework of sustainable development, which led to an approach focused on disaster risk management rather than disaster management itself, reinforcing the preventive and proactive dimension, adopting a participatory approach and enshrining community awareness.
On the sidelines of his participation in the 6th Arab Regional Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction, Interior Minister Brahim Red has met the UN Secretary General's Special Representative for Disaster Risk Reduction, head of the United Nations Office for Disaster Prevention, Kamal Kishore. On this occasion, the minister reviewed the new provisions of the new legal framework relating to the rules of prevention, intervention and reduction of disaster risks within the framework of sustainable development, which extends the field of risks to 18 risks and include modern mechanisms adapted to the new challenges and inspired by the Sendai framework. For his part, the UN representative expressed his interest in Algeria's experience in disaster reduction, calling for it to be shared with the rest of the world. Mr. Marad also met with the Minister or the Interior Minister of Kuwait, Sheikh Fahd Youssef Saud As-Sabah. Now, Syria's acting Foreign Minister Assad al-Shaybani has said that a new inclusive Syrian government will be formed in March. The Sana news agency reported that the new government will represent all segments of the Syrian population. Mr. al-Shaybani said all Syrians played a role in this change, adding that a new constitution would serve as a guiding framework for all citizens. He urged the international community to support Syria's new leaders by calling for the lifting of Western sanctions against Syria. Meanwhile, the A3+ group of the Security Council has called on the international community to support the political transition in Syria, calling on Syrians to join forces to achieve the peace and stability they aspire to. More on the topic with Amina Borisha.
In his speech at a Security Council meeting devoted to the situation in Syria, political coordinator of the permanent mission of Algeria to the United Nations, Tawfiq Al-Eid Qudri, who spoke on behalf of the A3+ group, said that the A3+, including Algeria, Somalia, Sierra Leone, Guyana, called on the international community to support the Syrian transition and assist the Syrian people in completing a peaceful, sustainable, and inclusive political process led by the Syrians.
Now more than ever, the Syrian people are seeking meaningful change in their country, a change that will enable them to realize their legitimate aspirations for peace, stability, prosperity, and well-being. The A3+ calls upon the international community to support Syria's transition and assist the Syrian people in achieving a peaceful, sustainable, lasting, and inclusive Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process in line with Security Council Resolution 2254.
While emphasizing the important role that the United Nations should play in the political transition in Syria, the A3+ said they were looking forward to the steps following the commitment announced by the new Syrian authorities in favor of this transition.
The A3+ emphasized the pivotal role the United Nations can play in facilitating a process that is inclusive and reflects the aspirations of the Syrian people, and urge all parties to engage constructively in good faith. We emphasize that rebuilding Syria must be a collective effort of all its people, irrespective of their backgrounds. The Syrian people have suffered immensely for over 13 years and deserve peace, stability, and prosperity.
He nevertheless expressed the concern of A3+ about the continued violence in Syria. The group called for an immediate countrywide ceasefire in light of these events.
We are deeply concerned about the ongoing violence in Syria and urgently call for a nationwide ceasefire. The A3+ strongly condemns all acts of terrorism and violence that continue to claim the lives of Syrian citizens and urge all actors to refrain from actions that...
The group called for the lifting of financial sanctions imposed on Syria for years, calling on regional and international actors to help the country recover.
You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. I'm Jamal Osmani. Now, more news to the Western Sahara file. The Union of Students of Saqiya al-Hamra and Wad al-Dahab have denounced in the province of Tipaza the inhuman conditions of Sahrawi students in the Moroccan occupation prisons, calling on the international community to take responsibility for the deterioration of their health. Sahrawi students detained in Moroccan prisons, including 8 Milul 1 and 2, the prison of Saleh and the prison of Marrakesh, are victims of harassment, racial discrimination, and deprivation of all their human rights, denounced the final statement of a meeting organized at the University Center of Tipaza in the framework of the celebration of the 49th anniversary of the proclamation of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic in the presence of the ambassador of the Sahrawi Republic to Algiers, Abdelkader Talib Omar. Saeed Bougazi reports.
The Saqiya al-Hamra and Wad al-Dahab Students' Union added in the same statement that students belonging to the group of companions of the Shahid al-Wali are victims of harassment and are deprived of taking their university exams with a lack of minimum living conditions inside the prisons in which they are detained, despite their hunger strikes, ensuring that they will continue to challenge and fight against their torturers despite the deterioration of their health. The final declaration holds the Moroccan occupation authorities and international and human rights organizations fully responsible for the abuses to which Sahrawi students are exposed in Moroccan prisons and university campuses. An appeal was also launched to the United Nations agencies and international non-governmental human rights organizations, including Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and the International Red Cross, to intervene to protect the Sahrawi students detained in the prisons of the Moroccan occupation. In turn, Ambassador Talib Omar stressed in his speech on the occasion that the Sahrawi people will continue their struggle to restore full sovereignty over their territories in accordance with international law and UN conventions. He also noted the failure of all the despicable tools and methods of the Moroccan occupier to deprive the Sahrawi people of their right to self-determination by imposing a policy of fait accompli and seeking the support of the Zionists and certain imperialist colonial powers. The Sahrawi ambassador referred in this respect to the latest failure of the Moroccan occupier in international courts, recording that the Court of Justice of the European Union ruled on 4th October that the people of Western Sahara have the right to self-determination and that any agreement concerning their territory must obtain their explicit consent.
Today, Algeria is celebrating World Radio Day and the 65th anniversary of the nuclear explosions in the Algerian desert. On this occasion, Radio Algeria International has held a conference entitled Radio an Honest Witness of Crimes and Do Not Lapse with Time. Said Bouhazi, the details in this report.
At the headquarters of the Algerian radio, experts and specialists in the field affirm that these nuclear explosions are a stain on the forehead of colonial France and a heinous crime that does not lapse with time. In this respect, the researcher in nuclear engineering, Professor Ammar Mansouri, emphasized the despicable character of the crimes committed by French colonialism in the Algerian desert after its failure to divide it, and considered these explosions a retaliatory step after France realized that its days in Algeria were numbered.
It is important to note that France did everything in its power to retain the Algerian desert after independence, but it failed. Therefore, it chose the desert as an act of revenge, claiming that it was the ideal place to conduct these experiments. They lied, stating that the desert had no inhabitants, animals, plants, or anything else. These crimes were committed by France by choosing the desert without the consent of its inhabitants. What is astonishing here is the immense of energy used in the first explosion, which was 70,000 tons, affecting the environment in all its dimensions in this region and polluting neighboring countries, even reaching some countries in Europe. The cleanup of the waste left on the surface after France left the 1967 explosion sites, as well as the waste it buried in the desert, for which we have not yet found maps of their locations, is still ongoing. This year, I hope we will make 2025 the year to end this crisis and the issue we discuss every year. Algeria must reach a final solution to it this year.
For his part, the president of the National Association of Nuclear Medicine, Dr. Imad Eddin Rodban, highlighted the scientific and health implications of the French nuclear explosions in the Algerian desert, given the long-term dangers of nuclear radiation due to the nature of the materials resulting from the explosions, such as plutonium, whose effects continue for thousands of years.
The colonialism nuclear bombardment in the Algerian Sahara have various dimensions: historical, political, humanitarian, and environmental. Also, scientific and health dimensions considered one of the most important fields that must be supervised because of the danger of nuclear radiation on human health in the long term, due to the nature of the materials resulting from explosions such as plutonium that has a lifespan of about 24,400 years, which means thousands of generations would be affected, besides the vast areas that were destined for these bombardments from Rigan to Tamanrasset.
Dr. Rodban also explained a range of severe health effects caused by these radioactive materials which damage DNA and lead to inflammations, various types of cancer, and congenital deformities. He emphasized in this regard the need to raise public awareness about the dangers of these radiations which have not been cleaned up to this day. The lawyer and human rights activist Mrs. Fatima Zahra bin Brahim, for her part, revealed the details of the legal battle she is fighting alongside specialists and activists in the field to condemn France by exploring all legal means that prove its crime. She confirmed that they have had access to secret files that will enable them to present internationally recognized legal material that proves this is a crime against humanity that does not lapse with time.
We are currently searching for all legal means to condemn France's crime against humanity. The files are classified, but we have managed to access these files and obtain copies through our French colleagues and legal professionals working either in France or in French Polynesia, with whom I am collaborating. At present, we are preparing what is known as the legal arsenal. When you confront them with what they have done, you must provide internationally recognized legal material that proves this is a crime against humanity. Therefore, the crime against humanity is a complex field with various laws, but there is an international law that classifies the crime as a crime against humanity that does not lapse with time. This is the principle from which we will begin.
Whatever the justifications and loopholes used by France to avoid condemnation and rightly compensate for the damage caused by the nuclear explosions in the Algerian desert, the day will come when France will have to face the reality of its obscure past and give back to Caesar what belongs to Caesar.
The Algerian people are commemorating today the 65th anniversary of the first nuclear explosions carried out by the French colonial authorities in southern Algeria, an act that will forever be engraved in history as a crime against humanity committed with premeditation, engaging in legal responsibility for a horrific crime. On the 13th of February 1960, the first French atomic bomb, known as the Gerboise Bleue, was detonated at the Regan nuclear site, causing a natural, human, and environmental disaster, with power of between 60,000 and 70,000 tons of explosives, 5 times of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima in Japan, according to many experts in the field. Masoud Sharfi tells us more in this report.
The case of this infamous crime committed by the French state 6 decades ago is undergoing important developments. Recently, Algeria's request aimed at holding France responsible for disposing the disastrous residues of these nuclear explosions has been explicitly enshrined in Algerian legislation with a view to consolidating the rights of present and future generations. This approach took concrete form in a law on the management, control and disposal of waste, adopted by the Council of the Nation in January. In his address to the nation before the two chambers of parliament last December, the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, said that Algerians have an inalienable right and they demand recognition of the massacres committed by the colonizer. In his interview with the French daily L'Opinion, the President of the Republic stated that reparations for the nuclear explosions and the use of chemical weapons by France in southern Algeria is an essential topic for the resumption of bilateral cooperation, calling for these disputes to be settled once and for all. He said that the issue of cleaning up the sites of nuclear explosions is necessary and that it constitutes a humanitarian, moral, political and military duty, saying that this operation must be conducted with the French authorities who must reveal with precision the areas where these explosions took place. In order to deal with the risk posed by radioactive pollution, the French government decided to create in 2021 the National Agency for the Rehabilitation of Former Nuclear Test and Explosion Sites, given that environmental radioactivity remains high in the areas affected by this crime due to the persistence of radiation residues. At the time, the French occupying forces claimed that what they called tests were carried out in uninhabited and deserted areas, namely Rigan in Adrar and In Ikr in Tamanrasset, even though home to almost 20,000 civilians. Between 1960 and 1966, colonial France carried out 57 nuclear explosions, 4 aerial explosions in Rigan, 13 underground explosions in Ikr, a further 35 explosions in Hamoudia, and 5 plutonium explosions in Ikr, within a radius of 30 kilometers of the mountain where the underground explosions took place. The inhabitants of these regions are still suffering from the after effects of these explosions. Every year, several cases of cancer, congenital malformations, disability, infertility, and chronic psychological disorders are recorded. In addition, the environmental and territorial balance of these areas remains seriously threatened. To date, the Algerian authorities have not received any maps or plans showing where the material used in these explosions was buried, despite the numerous appeals and initiatives launched by several associations for the care of victims, the decontamination of radioactive waste, and the return of health and technical archives. Official France continues to turn deaf ear to this demand, a central issue in its relations with Algeria.
With this, we come to the end of today's news bulletin. Thank you so much for joining us. We're coming live to you from Algiers. Stay tuned.